But like, you don't see him go on that many podcasts, right? Like, have you seen him besides Rogan? So I think, bro, like, I don't know if it was his ego or like he just wanted to come at me, but to this day, I don't really understand it. I'm not upset about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could have taken it, at the time I took it personal. I was like, bro, why is this guy going so ham at me? Like, that guy, like, Andrew definitely came in, did his research, right? He knows, like, everyone loves Steve, Kyle's the boss, and then there's me, right? So he knew to kind of throw shade at me. He's not going to go at Kyle or Steve, right? And so I didn't really know how to handle it. I think I would have handled it differently now. I was just so confused.
You would have punched him if it happened now?
No, I just think I would have been like, bro, like in my opinion, if someone came in and was sitting in this chair and talked to you like that on your own show, you'd be like, yo, bro, like, you're being super disrespectful right now. You're being super disrespectful right now.
So a few months ago, we covered what is now potentially one of the biggest and most entertaining podcast beefs of 2023, because the Andrew Schulz and NelkBoys arc had it all from beginning to end. It was first randomly leaked on the Iced Coffee Hour podcast by the NelkBoys manager himself that they did in fact have an unreleased podcast episode with Andrew Schulz that they couldn't put out because of how bad he went at Steiny, and Steiny didn't want the podcast out.
You guys ever shoot podcasts and not post them?
Yeah, yeah, it's a sore subject, but yeah, there was one.
Can you say who? You can't.
Yeah, no, well, Steve said it, and Steiny got mad that Steve said it, so that's the only reason I want to say it. But there was an episode with Andrew Schulz, and
oh, whoa,
and man, sorry Steinberg, man, I love you, bro. Like, don't text me middle of the night upset, but Schulz went after, like, you know, I think, you know, when like a stand-up comedian like looks in a crowd and decides like just go after somebody. Yeah. Well, I think like Schulz was kind of like went after Steiny, and he and it was pretty awkward.
Was it the whole episode, or was it like?
It was a bulk of it. All of us felt bad for Steiny. We're like, damn, like, you know, it's like, I know that feeling.
The clip went completely viral, and when the fans found out that there was an unreleased episode, they really, really wanted to see it. And Andrew Schulz actually responded pretty quickly. He responded on his own podcast, essentially telling the NelkBoys to release the entire episode with no cuts. And at the same time, he was taking some shots at Steiny.
Everybody, welcome to Flagrant. Now let's start the show with a message, okay? NELK, release the pod. Release the pod, NELK! It's time for war, NELK!
Let's go!
Okay? So I think it was just like, and then I think maybe Steiny asked me one more question, and it could have been genuine from him, but it felt like trolling. And I was like, who is this chicken McNugget asking me like who is this guy? But, you know, I don't think anybody has gone further in entertainment with less talent than this kid. So it's like, I'm like, where does he get off trolling? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where does he get off trolling?
Now, the NelkBoys also didn't hold back and right away released over an hour and 20 minutes of that episode, not on their main channel, which makes sense, it's understandable, but they uploaded it to Twitter, and then I think somebody else reposted or re-uploaded it to YouTube. Once again, we covered all of that back when it happened, but the fact that the NelkBoys released the episode, it actually put an end to the entire drama, because everybody, all the fans, were able to make up their own mind on what actually happened and who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Surprisingly, after the episode was released, there was a pretty big debate about who was in the wrong, if Steiny was way too sensitive and overreacted and was unprofessional, or if maybe Andrew Schulz went way too hard on somebody that was simply trying their best to do their job. And well, recently Steiny went on the No Jumper podcast and had a very interesting conversation about what he thought went wrong with the Andrew Schulz episode. Now, keep in mind that it has been over 3 months since that episode was released or uploaded, but it's been over a year since they recorded it, which is basically like 3 to 4 years in internet time. So you might ask yourself, why bring it up again? And the truth is that although Steiny is pretty big in his own lane, the drama with Andrew Schulz was insanely huge and brought him a lot of exposure, whether good or bad. He did get it. And obviously when it comes to Adam 22, we all know that he's willing to do a lot of things for content. And in this case, he's essentially turning on Andrew Schulz, or at least pretending to, just so that he could get Steiny to feel comfortable and actually tell everybody how he feels about Andrew Schulz and get good content.
Your version of the Jason Love controversy was the Andrew Schulz controversy. The whole world kind of got to see you get on camera.
Yeah, that sucked, bro.
Are
I'm
you
not gonna lie.
like, were you actually genuinely worried about them releasing it? I watched the whole thing today.
Okay.
And before that, I had just seen clips and kind of like heard about it. And then today I watched the whole thing. My thoughts on it. I've known Andrew Schulz for a long time, and that from the beginning felt like a different version of Andrew Schulz than what I've seen before. Like, I feel like he was not in a great mood that day, even outside of whatever happened between you guys. I just don't really feel like that just wasn't the Andrew Schulz that I'm just used to seeing. After a while, I did just start to feel like this is just like a level of aggression I'm not used to seeing from Andrew, and it just doesn't really, something feels off.
And it was sort of like the easy to pick on you thing that you're saying with the NELK guys. That sort of.
He's not going to go at Kyle or Steve, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't fair because you were the one who I felt like was talking the most.
Is what we just said the mainstream opinion that you've seen, or do you think that most people thought that Andrew Schulz was right to be annoyed by you?
Well, I mean, there's two things, right? Like my persona, my character is like you said, whatever the word was, the whipping thing.
Whipping.
So like people like to go at me and shit, and like people like to fuck with me and whatever in the comments, whatever it is. We got notice that we were going to do that like maybe 6 hours before, and we were doing Happy Dad events all day, so we were burnt out like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then when I walked in too, the energy felt like kind of odd. But yeah, I don't know what really happened. Like I really can't explain that, because I thought with NELK, you always think like, especially me, I'm like, yo, these guys might be f***ing with me.
Now, I'll try to be as unbiased as possible, and I'll include some clips from the Full Send podcast with Andrew Schulz to back up my points. But for example, the first thing that they bring up, the first argument that they bring up that I've heard other people use is that Andrew Schulz wasn't himself and was acting way too serious compared to other appearances, and that he was targeting Steiny for no reason, which is not what happened. I mean, you can rewatch the first 45 minutes, but you don't have to. I'll put some clips here that clearly show some highlights where Andrew Schulz was being way too nice to both Steiny and the other guys, even though they were asking horrible questions and not really moving the conversation along. But he was still trying to engage and, in my opinion, carrying the actual podcast.
39. We're a little bit younger.
How old are you?
We're not that young though. I'm 28.
Yeah,
28.
Me too.
But you could have a girlfriend. You don't have to, you know.
Got mains, but we're always on the road. It's like that NBA lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it's a little tough.
Yeah.
You can't stay loyal. There's problems. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You think of yourself like an NBA player, right?
Well, when they're on the
you
road
look in
and you
the
got
mirror.
chicks, I don't know, you go to different cities.
Yeah.
Like whatever.
Yeah.
Like you tell me you have an IUD, then I'm
NBA.
Do you? Yeah, you like an NBA player. Yeah, I don't know, man. I would.
From Toronto, at least. Like,
Yeah,
You're not
okay.
even from Toronto, bro.
No, I mean
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're from
20 minutes
Mississauga.
from
You're
fool.
from, You're
Yeah,
from
see?
the Long Island. Of
He's like
Toronto.
saying he's from the
Yeah,
city, but
yeah.
he's from
Not
Long
even-
Island.
This is Toronto Light or whatever.
Yeah,
they
see,
call it.
he knows what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
Canadian.
No, but yeah.
Everyone wants to be from the. Well, everyone wants to be from the
six.
six when Drake's from there. It's like
Now Drake made Toronto cool, man.
straight up.
Yeah.
What's the biggest thing you bought her?
Her probably her engagement ring.
What'd that run you?
You say the
It
price?
was a lot. I'm not gonna say it because then
Little ballpark or no?
I'm not gonna say it because I've never told her, and I've just been kind of
Ah.
like making her think it's even more than it is.
True.
She's
that's
probably
fine.
asking like her friends. Like,
Yeah,
you
all
think
the
it was
time.
100K
And
or
I make
more?
them lie. I'm even the jeweler. I'm like, don't you
They
ever
can never
tell
know
her.
too,
They
right?
can never know. They can never know until divorce, and they're like, this was cubic zirconia. But
That's why.
yeah.
Did you buy Powerball tickets or no?
Nah, stuff. I should have.
What was it? 2 billion?
$2 billion.
What would you do with the 2 billion?
That's a good question.
Now, to be fair, Steiny did say that was back when he was first starting to record podcasts, so he wasn't as experienced back then. And that is a fair point, especially if you're Steiny in that position where you're essentially trying to show everybody that you're a team player, asking Andrew Schulz basic questions, but still asking him stuff, even though you didn't have time to prepare, and you're seeing that your coworkers and your friends are not asking anything. But even with all the bad questions and awkward moments, the show kept going. I mean, it literally went on for 45 minutes until Steiny did something that actually made Andrew Schulz upset. And it's surprising that everybody keeps forgetting about this exact moment, okay? The first 45 minutes, it was a little bit tough, it was rough, awkward moments, this and that, but it was fine. And then at the 45-minute mark, this happens. By the way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It helps out so much, and we're so close to 100,000 subscribers. Thank you.
100%.
Right? So like when you hear Kanye complaining about the deals, you get to look at it as someone who offers deals. Most people don't offer deals.
True.
So they're going, well, I'm getting f***ed. He's probably getting f***ed. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
It's hard to have empathy for that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think we lost him.
Fault. I don't even know where I was gonna go. Where are we at?
I have no idea.
Buzz,
Low key.
No.
That moonshine hit me.
You know,
What bothers you the most right now?
nothing.
Nothing bothers you?
You looking at your phone while we're doing this interview, and everybody's seeming disinterested.
Were you looking at notes or texting girls?
Notes.
Do you think that I gave you a fair shot in the beginning?
You did, but I sent a text during the pod, and I think that's when it turned. Is
Right.
that when it turned?
Yeah.
I'm trying. What do you mean?
Me taking time out of my day to do this and then feeling
Dude,
like
I've never
I'm forcing you guys to do the podcast.
I've never been more
That
excited to
annoyed
do a
me.
podcast.
Say again?
I've never been more excited. I'm sorry. I had to
Don't
look at my notes.
apologize. You don't have
No.
to apologize. You asked me what annoyed me, and I gave you an honest answer.
Wait, are you being serious about that?
Yeah, that annoyed me.
Really?
Yes.
So if
Is
someone,
that surprising to you?
well, if I'm looking at my notes, I have some things personally that I wrote that I wanted to ask you. Not on there.
Okay.
So I can't look at that and then ask you that.
I mean, you can, I guess.
And getting called out for texting during the podcast, it really offended him for some reason, and he really took that personally. I mean, if somebody calls you out for texting while they're trying to tell you something, and then you lie and tell them that you weren't texting and you were looking at notes, it shows that you're guilty, or you have a guilty mind and know that what you were doing is wrong. Otherwise, there would be no need to lie about that. Regardless, the whole thing could have ended right there. And the fact that nobody talks about Steiny escalating the situation is so wild to me, because it was him that the one that brought it up again after Andrew Schulz had moved on and started being nice to everybody again. And what's really interesting to me is the fact that both of them, both Adam22 and Steiny, are sitting there really thinking and wondering what could have caused Andrew Schulz to act the way he did towards Steiny, to the point where Steiny comes to the conclusion that Schulz must have done some research and known that, Kyle was the main guy, Steve was likable, and that Steiny was the punching bag, which is, I guess you could argue that Andrew Schulz did do some research, but that just shows you who's a professional and who isn't. But there's no way that Andrew Schulz actually went in with the agenda of going at Steiny. There's just no way. Because, once again, the trolling that was coming from Andrew Schulz didn't start until after minute 45, when Steiny got called out for texting and completely ignoring Andrew Schulz, which is actually disrespectful. Could you imagine being in front of a guest like Andrew Schulz, or even anybody else, just out of pure respect? You don't, while they're on a monologue or while they're telling you something, you don't just look down on your phone and ignore them until everything gets quiet, and then you just look up and go, "Oh, my bad. So where were we? I'm lost. What's up, bro? What you got?" Come on. That just makes me believe that Steiny probably thought that Andrew Schulz wasn't that big of a stand-up comic and was probably a low-tier comic, which is why he was probably self-releasing his own comedy special instead of, going to Netflix and all of that.
But then it just took a turn where I was like, yo, this guy's getting a little personal. People don't really know this, but that was a year ago. That was filmed so long ago, and that was one of my, not first episodes, but I was still early in the game.
Right.
And so I didn't really know how to handle it. I think I would have handled it differently now. I was just so confused.
You would have punched him if it happened now?
No, I just think I would have been like, bro, like in my opinion, if someone came in and was sitting in this chair and talked to you like that on your own show, you'd be like, yo, bro, like, you're being super disrespectful right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think we lost him.
No, my fault. I don't even know where I was gonna go. Where are we at? You're being super disrespectful right now.
I have no idea.
You're being super disrespectful right now.
Because as the person being interviewed, it's kind of like assumed that even if you think that the questions that you're being asked are sort of dumb or lame or whatever, that you're just going to kind of roll with the punches, right? And it's like that was kind of like the vibe, is that he just wasn't like happy with the quality of the interview, which I feel you, but at the same time, like, if you do an interview and you're kind of surprised that the person interviewing you doesn't know as much about you as you might have expected, to me, you just.
But that didn't even seem like his biggest qualm, because Steve wasn't talking at all, and all he was doing was praising Steve. Like, it just didn't, like, all the energies weren't matching.
Something I realized, I think a lot of these people come in kind of like knowing, like that guy, like Andrew definitely came in, did his research, right? He knows like everyone loves Steve, Kyle's the boss, and then there's me, right? So he knew to kind of throw shade at me. But But like, bro, like I don't know. I to this day I can't really explain that.
Now, even if we give Steiny the benefit of the doubt and believe that he was actually trying his best to keep the conversation going and to try and ask good questions, but he just wasn't the best back then, even if we pretend that that was the case, it's been over a whole year since that incident happened, okay? So technically, Steiny has had over a whole year to think about what happened and reflect on the incident. But after all that time, he is now saying that the way that he would handle it would be to essentially double down and call out Andrew Schulz in a more aggressive way because of how disrespectful he was being to him, which is wild because that is exactly what happened. He tried to call out Andrew Schulz. It didn't go so well. And it went to the point that he was actually following Andrew Schulz after the podcast was done and bugging him about why he didn't like him and why he did that to him. It was just cringe at that point. So I don't know if he would have handled it any better now than he did back then. And once again, I don't know if Adam 22 is playing a character to get Steiny to get more comfortable and actually tell everybody how he feels, or if Adam 22 himself actually believes what he's saying.
Right. Well, you know what's funny about Andrew, and I love Andrew for the record, but like,
So you're siding with him?
but one of the accusations about him that I've seen, I saw like one of these comedy commentary channels like make a video about this the other day, but basically like saying that Andrew plays like a fake version of himself on the podcast where he thinks that everything that everybody says on Flagrant is hilarious or brilliant. So it's like that, like, he gets some criticism for that. I don't know how widespread that criticism is. So basically, like, people will say that Andrew plays like an exaggerated version of himself on Flagrant, which I myself have kind of noticed that, like, sometimes I'll notice him like laughing and it's like he thinks that the joke is funnier than the joke actually is, but it's okay because it's a podcast and it's like you got to keep the energy going and everything. But I kind of felt like your exchange with him there was like the exact opposite of that. Like he kind of like chose to like take a more negative, side of things, which I'm not really like used to that from him.
No, but like you don't see him go on that many podcasts, right? Like, have you seen him besides Rogan? So I think I don't know if it was his ego or like he just wanted to come at me, but to this day I don't really understand it. I'm not upset about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could have taken it at the time. I took it personal. I was like, bro, why is this guy going so ham at me? Like you said, like, yeah, I'm not asking you the craziest intellectual questions. I'm just trying to like actually like have a conversation.
So do you feel like it coming out was net positive or negative for Steiny, the brand?
Positive, dude.
I think it was good overall.
Yeah.
Put more attention on you, and you feel like overall you kind of came out looking better than him?
Okay, so a lot to unpack here, but this is one of the things that made me think this whole thing was a bit, because Adam 22 not correcting Steiny when Steiny said that Andrew Schulz doesn't really do any podcasts besides Joe Rogan's is pretty insane and obviously completely wrong. And look, once again, if you want to be fair, you could argue that both of them had a bad day and it wasn't their best performance. But if that's the case, then Steiny can't use that same argument as an excuse. For example, Steiny using the excuse that they only had 6 hours in advance, that they didn't really know who Andrew Schulz was and only saw his special right before the interview, and that they didn't really interview comics before. And on top of that, that they were all tired from promoting Happy Dad all day and then having to do the podcast. So they can't use all of that as an excuse and then be mad at Andrew Schulz when he picks up on all that energy of them being completely, overworked and tired, and then finishing the day with him as an interview, which didn't go well. And also, usually when comics go to other people's podcasts, unless they're going to the Joe Rogan Experience, they're usually going there to chill, talk, and promote something and then leave. It's not like Andrew Schulz was there to do the Flagrant podcast with the Full Send crew. It was him being interviewed by them, completely different. So once again, it makes me think that Steiny probably thought that Andrew Schulz wasn't that big and was there to promote his own thing, and so he needed to put on a show and not them necessarily. But now that Steiny realizes that Andrew Schulz has a massive audience and he is pretty big, he is now trying to make him seem like the bad guy, essentially.
I don't take shit personally at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, if people want to with me like that was a little bit too far because I took it like personally. But I think at the end of the day, like, we're in this game, so
I feel like Andrew has like almost the problem that he's like a really, really smart comic. So he kind of knows what's going on during the conversation to such an extent that like I asked him about Brendan Schaub. I asked him like, do you think Brendan Schaub's a funny comedian?
Yeah.
And he just like immediately was like, oh, so now you're doing the clickbait shit.
Yeah.
And I was like kind of like taken off guard a little bit because I'm like, oh, right. He's just as smart as me about this shit. And he knows exactly what I'm doing when I say that. And by saying that about somebody that me and him are both cool with, it is kind of like, oh, I'm just like kind of going for the viral title real quick right there. The same way that when I'm on Bradley's shit and he just keeps trying to get me to say a number about how much we made off of the Jason Love scene or whatever. It's like, I know what you're doing. Like we're both like speaking the same language here. I know that it'd be a really good title if you could put X millions of dollars or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's
but if you look at it in like the grand scheme of things, like he also got like a lot of NELK fans and he got a lot of attention from our side.
True.
So he benefited as well. And like I said, like, you know this, a lot of NELK people like to me, the fans, like it's part of the joke. So there was probably a good amount that like were like, love this guy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's pretty funny and interesting that Adam22 brought up the YouTube channels that criticize and make fun of Andrew Schulz for the way that he acts on his podcast, because we've all seen them. They call out the knee slapping, the heavy interrupting, overreacting to jokes, and Andrew Schulz is trying to be a philosopher a lot of the times, which is kind of true. I mean, one of our biggest videos here is breaking down the Flagrant podcast with Whitney Cummings, which was pretty wild. And in that case, Andrew Schulz definitely got destroyed. So once again, I'm not here to defend Andrew Schulz. In fact, I think it's pretty funny that out of all people, Steiny was the one that was able to trigger him and get a reaction out of Andrew Schulz, which props to him for that, because he essentially heckled Andrew Schulz and he took it way too serious. However, I do side with Andrew Schulz on this one, simply because if you rewatch the entire podcast episode, it's very clear that even though there are a lot of awkward moments, some bad questions, and some very distracting product placements, the podcast was okay, and for the most part it could have been used and it could have been a good podcast if it wasn't for Andrew Schulz feeling like he was being disrespected by essentially having them not care about him and texting while he's going on a rant. And funny enough, both Andrew Schulz and Steiny thought that they were being pranked because of what was going on. The only difference is that after everything has been settled and it's done, Andrew Schulz did kind of recognize that he went a little bit too far and went too hard on Steiny, but said that that is just how he felt, because he felt that Steiny was being fake, essentially. But Steiny, on the other hand, he didn't really take any accountability whatsoever at all, not for the texting, for not being prepared, and for overreacting after somebody simply answered your question honestly. And it looks like a whole year later, Steiny has no clue about what he could have possibly done wrong to upset Andrew Schulz during that podcast. But yeah, once again, the whole drama between Andrew Schulz and the NelkBoys was very interesting, and I wanted to go over that conversation again because I thought it was pretty straightforward, but I might be wrong. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video, but that is all we have for today. See ya.